All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. So today, we're really going deep, huh?
Oh yeah, we're diving into the cellular level today.
We are. Autophagy.
Autophagy, one of my favorite topics.
No, I gotta admit, when I first heard about this, I was like, autophagy? What in the world is that? But then I started reading up on it, and let me tell you, it's fascinating.
It really is. It's a process that's essential for life, but it can also be kind of a double-edged sword, especially when it comes to cancer.
That's the twist, right? That's why we're doing this deep dive.
Exactly. It's this paradox that we're going to try to unpack.
Because on one hand, autophagy is like our cell's built-in recycling system. It's like a, spring cleaning of our cells, right? Yeah, I like that analogy. It helps get rid of all the junk that builds up inside our cells. Damaged proteins, old organelles, stuff that's just taking up space and not doing anything useful.
So it keeps everything running smoothly, right?
Exactly. Keeps the cells healthy and functioning properly, and it's especially important when cells are under stress. Like, when they're exposed to toxins or radiation or just the normal wear and tear of life.
Exactly. Autophagy helps them adapt and survive those challenges.
Okay, so that's the good side of autophagy, but then there's the flip side, right?
Yeah, the dark side of autophagy.
The dark side. When it comes to cancer, things get a little more complicated. Because in some cases, autophagy can actually help cancer cells survive and grow.
And even spread and resist treatment.
Which is, obviously not what we want.
Not at all.
So today we're going to try to understand this complex relationship between autophagy and cancer. We're going to look at the evidence from scientific research and try to make sense of it all.
And hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a better understanding of this fascinating process and its role in this really complex disease.
Sounds good. All right, let's dive in. So first things first, how does autophagy actually work?
Okay, so think of it like this. You have these little recycling centers inside your cells called lysosomes.
Lysosomes, okay.
And autophagy basically delivers cellular waste to these lysosomes to be broken down and recycled.
Like a garbage truck.
Exactly, like a little garbage truck. It gathers up the trash, the damaged proteins, the worn-out organelles, and takes it to the lysosome, where it's all broken down into its basic components.
Okay, and then those components can be reused to build new molecules and organelles.
Exactly, so it's a really efficient system. It helps cells conserve energy and resources.
And it also keeps the cells clean and tidy.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got the basics of autophagy down. Now let's talk about how it relates to cancer.
Okay, so like I said before, autophagy can be a double-edged sword when it comes to cancer. In the early stages of cancer development, it can actually act as a tumor suppressor.
Really? How so?
Well, by getting rid of all the damaged components inside cells, autophagy helps maintain genomic stability.
Genomic stability. That means keeping our DNA safe and sound?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if our DNA is damaged, it can lead to mutations, which can increase the risk of cancer.
Right, because mutations are basically changes in our DNA code, right?
Yeah, and those changes can sometimes cause cells to grow and divide uncontrollably, which is what cancer is all about.
So autophagy is like a guardian of our genome.
Exactly. It helps prevent those early mutations from happening in the first place.
Okay, that makes sense. But then you said that autophagy can also help cancer cells survive and grow. How does that work?
Okay, so once a tumor is established, cancer cells often face a lot of stress.
Like, they're growing really fast, they're crowded together, they don't always have enough nutrients or oxygen.
Exactly. It's a tough environment for any cell to survive in. But cancer cells are pretty resourceful.
So they use autophagy to help them cope with this stress.
Exactly. Autophagy allows them to recycle their own components, like proteins and organelles, to generate energy and building blocks for new growth.
So it's like they're eating themselves to stay alive.
In a way, yes. It's a
Yeah.
survival mechanism.
And that's how autophagy can actually help cancer cells grow and spread.
It's one of the ways, yes.
Okay, so we've got this dual role of autophagy. It can be a tumor suppressor, but it can also help cancer cells survive. It seems like a bit of a paradox.
It is a paradox, and it makes it really challenging to develop effective therapies that target autophagy.
Because if we inhibit autophagy, we might be helping the cancer in some cases. But if we stimulate it, we might be helping it in other cases.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act. And it's why we need to understand the specific context of each individual cancer to know how best to target autophagy.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the specific ways that autophagy can help cancer cells.
All right. Well, one way is by helping them resist cell death.
Cell death. Isn't that a good thing?
Well, it is if we're trying to kill cancer cells.
Right.
but cancer cells are very good at evading cell death.
And autophagy can help them do that.
Yes, it can, because autophagy can provide cancer cells with the energy and nutrients they need to survive, even when they're under stress.
So it's like a lifeline for them.
Exactly.
And this resistance to cell death can make it harder to treat cancer with chemotherapy and radiation.
Yes, it can, because those therapies work by damaging DNA and triggering cell death. But if the cancer cells are using autophagy to resist cell death, the therapies might not be as effective.
Okay, so that's one way that autophagy can help cancer cells. What are some other ways?
Well, autophagy can also help cancer cells metastasize.
Metastasize. That means spreading to other parts of the body, right?
Exactly. And metastasis is one of the most dangerous aspects of cancer, because once cancer cells spread, it becomes much harder to treat.
So how does autophagy help cancer cells metastasize?
Well, for cancer cells to metastasize, they need to detach from the primary tumor and travel through the bloodstream or lymphatic system to other parts of the body.
Right.
And this detachment process is actually very stressful for cells.
So they use autophagy to help them survive the journey.
Exactly. Autophagy helps them resist a type of cell death called anoikis, which is triggered by detachment from the extracellular matrix.
Anoikis.
And studies have shown that blocking autophagy can actually reduce metastasis in animal models.
So it's like autophagy is giving the cancer cells a survival kit for their journey to a new location.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so we've got autophagy helping cancer cells resist cell death and metastasize. Are there any other ways it can help them?
Yes, autophagy can also help cancer cells become more resistant to treatment.
Drug resistance. That's a big problem in cancer treatment, right?
It's a huge problem, because when cancer cells become resistant to treatment, it means that the drugs we're using to kill them are no longer working.
And autophagy can contribute to this drug resistance.
Yes, it can, because autophagy can help cancer cells remove the drugs from their system.
Like it's pumping the drugs out.
In a way, yes. Autophagy can help cancer cells break down and get rid of the drugs before they can do their job.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
It is.
So it seems like autophagy is playing a pretty significant role in cancer progression.
It is, and is why it's such an important target for new cancer therapies.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the potential therapies that target autophagy.
All right, well, as we discussed earlier, there are two main approaches. Stimulating autophagy and inhibiting autophagy.
Right. And which approach we use depends on the specific context of the cancer.
Exactly.
So let's start with stimulating autophagy. When would we want to do that?
Well, in some cases, stimulating autophagy can actually enhance the effectiveness of cancer therapies.
Really? How so?
Well, remember that autophagy can trigger cell death in some cases.
Right.
So if we can stimulate autophagy in cancer cells, we might be able to push them over the edge and kill them.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we stimulate autophagy?
There are a few different ways. One way is to use drugs that inhibit mTOR.
MTO, what's that?
It's a protein that regulates cell growth and metabolism. And it's also a key negative regulator of autophagy.
So if we inhibit mTOR, we can activate autophagy.
Exactly. And there are already some mTOR inhibitors that are approved for use in cancer treatment.
Like what?
Like rapamycin and its analogs, everolimus and temsirolimus. These drugs have shown some promise in treating certain types of cancer.
Okay, so that's one way to stimulate autophagy. What are some other ways?
Well, another way is to use histone deacetylase inhibitors or HDAC inhibitors.
HDAC inhibitors?
Yes, these are drugs that can alter the way DNA is packaged inside cells, and they can also induce autophagy.
Interesting.
There are a few HDAC inhibitors that are already approved for use in cancer treatment, such as vorinostat and romidepsin.
Okay, so we've got MTR inhibitors and HDAC inhibitors. Are there any other ways to stimulate autophagy?
Yes, there are also some tyrosine kinase inhibitors, or TKIs, that can induce autophagy.
TKIs?
Yes, these are drugs that target specific proteins involved in cell signaling, and some of them can also trigger autophagy.
Like what?
Like sorafenib and erlotinib.
Okay, so we've got a few different ways to stimulate autophagy. Now let's talk about inhibiting autophagy. When would we want to do that?
Well, as we discussed earlier, autophagy can help cancer cells survive, spread, and resist treatment. So in many cases, we might want to inhibit autophagy to make the cancer cells more vulnerable.
Okay, so how do we inhibit autophagy?
Again, there are a few different ways. One way is to use drugs that directly target the autophagy machinery.
The autophagy machinery?
Yes, the proteins that are involved in the process of autophagy.
Okay.
And there are a number of these drugs in development.
Like what?
like ATG4 inhibitors, such as NSC185058 and UAMC2526.
Okay, so those drugs directly target the autophagy machinery. What are some other ways to inhibit autophagy?
Well, another way is to use drugs that block the signaling pathways that regulate autophagy.
Like what?
Like PI3K inhibitors, such as 3-methyladenine, wortmannin, and LY29402.
Okay.
And then there are lysosome inhibitors, which block the final stage of autophagy.
Lysosome inhibitors.
Yes. These drugs prevent the lysosomes from breaking down the cellular debris that's delivered by autophagy.
So it's like they're clogging up the recycling center.
Exactly.
And what are some examples of lysosome inhibitors?
Well, the most well-known examples are chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine.
Chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. Those are anti-malarial drugs, right?
Yes, they are. But they've also been shown to inhibit autophagy.
Interesting.
And they've been tested in clinical trials in combination with other cancer therapies.
And what have the results been?
Well, the results have been mixed. In some trials, they've shown some promise, but in other trials, they haven't been very effective.
So it's still early days for these drugs as cancer therapy.
It is, but there's a lot of ongoing research in this area.
Okay, so we've got a number of potential therapies that target autophagy, but as you said earlier, it's a delicate balancing act.
It is, and it's why we need to carefully consider the specific context of each individual cancer before we decide whether to stimulate or inhibit autophagy.
Right. So what are some of the things we need to consider?
Well, we need to consider the type of cancer, the stage of the cancer, and the genetic makeup of the cancer cells.
And we also need to consider the potential side effects of these therapies.
Absolutely. Because targeting autophagy can have effects on other cellular processes.
So it's not a simple solution.
It's not. But it's a very promising area of research. And I think we're going to see some really exciting developments in the years to come.
Okay, so final thoughts on autophagy and cancer.
It's complex.
Very complex.
It's a double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
And we need to be very careful about how we target it.
Exactly.
But it's also a really exciting area of research.
It is. Because if we can figure out how to harness the power of autophagy, I think we can make a real difference in the fight against cancer.
I agree. All right, that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time.